Hey Teresa, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks.
Yeah, so tell us about your background and how you got started as an author in the first place.
How I got started as an author. Well, I've always loved to write. I wrote, like most authors, I think I wrote a lot when I was a kid and on through high school and college. Um, Never anything published, just it was, I loved creative writing and that's what I did. Then I went to law school and that kind of knocked all the creativity and time to write out of me. So I took a little hiatus from writing, but a little bit later in life, I was going through a divorce and kind of wanted to get back in touch with things that made me happier. So I started taking some writing courses. So I started at UCLA in a writer's extension course. At the time, I was writing fiction, and that's what I read. That's what I wrote. That's what I loved. I didn't switch over to nonfiction until, as they say, life got stranger than fiction. So when I went through the experience I did with my dog and I both getting cancer, everybody kept saying you should write that book. You should write a memoir about that. So I did, and lo and behold, I loved nonfiction writing and having all the fiction writing background and um, going through the courses that I did for fiction were really helpful in writing something like a memoir. So that's the very quick version of how I became an author.
Awesome. Yeah, and so you've had a lot of success so far with your book, so tell us about the kind of the success you've achieved so far.
Yeah, so I guess they were right telling me I should write nonfiction, right? Yeah, I wrote the memoir. It's The Dog Lived and So Will I. I was originally blogging when I was going through cancer treatment, and that was I didn't have a lot of experience with blogging either. My blog started as a way of keeping friends and family up to date on what was going on with me when I went through my breast cancer treatment. But it kind of got a little bit of a fan base going as well. That darn World Wide Web really is worldwide. So I got a pretty good following for the blog and eventually, like I said, turned that into a memoir. And I did it the old-fashioned way, mostly because I didn't know any better. I didn't really consider self-publishing. I didn't know that much about it, and I did know about like the query process and trying to get an agent and that sort of thing because I had done it before for fiction, and I had done it before for another sort of gift book that I co-wrote with a friend, which got an agent but didn't get a publisher. So I just kept following that path. It wasn't so much a conscious decision as that's what I knew, and so that's what I did. And I got very lucky. I used querytracker.net to kind of research agents and to do some of the queries that I did. And I actually had 3 agents that were interested pretty quickly, so I was very, very lucky, which is also a good sign that I was onto something there. So I eventually picked one and went with her and started the long process of submitting the proposal and the sample chapters to publishers, and eventually was picked up by Sourcebooks, which I love. It's a medium-sized publisher that's really been expanding and growing, and they put a lot into the book and really promoted it really well. And then the ultimate lightning strike happened, which is that Amazon selected it as a Kindle Daily deal. So when that happened, that's when it hit the bestseller list. So I got to watch all day long as my Amazon, and believe me, that's all I did all day long was watch that. There was no getting any other work done. And I watched as the rankings went up, and so eventually it was the #1 seller on Amazon that day. But you never know what that means for bestseller lists until the bestseller list came out, and it hit #1 on the New York Times bestseller list for that week as well. So that was
Wow.
my quick journey.
Yeah,
Yeah.
awesome. So, I mean, going back to your story, can you share with us a little bit about, you went through cancer, your dog went through cancer. What was that whole experience like, and why did you decide to write that as a memoir?
Yeah, my dog actually had cancer first, and when he got diagnosed with cancer, they told me that with surgery and chemotherapy, he would live maybe a year. And it was shortly after I had gone through my divorce and had moved out and was sort of starting my life over again. And it was like that was about a year and a half after that. And this dog was a big part of my feeling like I had started my life over again. So I was a little annoyed that they were telling me I was going to have to start over yet again because this dog wasn't going to make it. So I opted to fight it And I didn't know that much about cancer. I'd not had cancer, and no one in my family had had cancer, and I didn't have any friends with cancer. So going through it with my dog, Seamus, was my first experience with cancer. And luckily, they were wrong about the prognosis. So he not only lived that year, he actually lived another 9 years after that. But it was 3 years after his diagnosis that I got diagnosed with cancer. And I found as I was going through the process that I was actually relying on a lot that I had learned from him and going through it with his cancer in going through my own cancer. I mean, things like one of the chemotherapies that I had, the dog had had as well. He had a young, wonderful oncologist where he was like her third patient ever. My surgeon was relatively new, and I was his fifth patient ever as a full-time, full-fledged doctor. Just amazing coincidences. We both had white blood cell crashes going through, but I understood the whole process, and I think was a whole lot less stressed and nervous and pessimistic than I would have been had I not been through it with the dog. And it turned out that was kind of a universal story for people, just having some guide to get through it, and whether it's cancer or any other kind of struggle in life, to have somebody who's been there before you and kind of can tell you what's going to happen and lead you through, or as we jokingly say, I followed the dog's lead. So it was an inspiring story. It inspired me and it inspired others. So I decided, well, maybe that's something I should be sharing then. And I like to think I was right about that.
Yeah, well, it looks like it.
Yeah, yeah.
Helped your message for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
So what would you say is kind of the biggest lesson that you learned going through that experience with cancer?
I think the biggest thing that I learned, I'm kind of, I'm a lawyer by training. That's my day job, is I'm a lawyer. And I'm a kind of a pessimist at heart. And if ever there was a time when that was not going to aid me, it was going through cancer. So it was the sort of the message of that you always have to have hope. And with the dog, they didn't really give me much hope. Like I said, they said that he would live a year even with surgery and chemotherapy, and there wasn't, that the original diagnosis didn't give me a lot of hope, but I decided I was going to fight it anyway. So I learned from that, yeah, you do have to have hope, and there is always hope. So, like I said, I was able to overcome my own sort of natural pessimism to be an optimist when it really counted, which was going through my own treatment. And that was sort of my biggest lesson going through that, and that's what I wanted to share with other people as well. You know, they say your attitude counts and you're supposed to be upbeat and all this, but that's hard to do when you're going through cancer and chemotherapy. But as long as I think underlying it all, you've still got some hope and you're doing it your way and getting through it, that's an important and strong message that I wanted to share.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's awesome. It's definitely an inspiring message.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, you talked about earlier you had been writing fiction earlier in your life.
Yeah.
I mean, how did that process go for you?
It went well because, like I said, that's what I read and that's what I loved, and I enjoyed writing it, so it went well in that sense. I, like most writers, do have that finished or semi-finished novel sitting in a drawer right here, sitting in a drawer. I did send that out and try to get an agent for that to no avail. I still have high hopes of redoing that, reworking it, because I think at this point it's so old now that probably modern technology would solve most of my protagonist problems. So I might have to go back and redo some things. And I would still like to do that. I'd love to return to fiction someday as well. But right now I'm really enjoying writing the nonfiction. So I have a second book coming out in October that's a sequel to the memoir as well. So that one's called The Dogs Were Rescued, and So Was I, about my two new beagles. One of whom is in the room with me, and I keep expecting she's going to howl at something, but so far we're good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. So, I mean, what would you say is kind of the biggest thing that you did in terms of marketing your books? Tips or strategies that you could share with other authors, of things that you did that you were really surprised how well it worked?
Yeah, I did do a lot of social media. I have a Facebook page for the book, and I spend a lot of time doing, on Facebook, getting a little bit better on Twitter. I have the advantage, I think, in that I have cute dogs, and that helps me market both books. It's a whole lot easier to be talking about the dogs and the things that they're doing, and people, after reading their journeys and following it, I think people like to see what's going on with the dog, so that makes it a little easier. The other fun thing I did when the Dog Lived launched was, they always say write what you know and write what you love, and I was lucky enough to be able to do that, not the cancer part, the dog part of it. So another thing that I happen to love is wine, and my boyfriend owns a wine shop. So we did a book and wine tour sort of together that we called Words, Wine, and Wags. And what it was is we partnered with a whole bunch of different dog rescue organizations, mostly in California, but we were in the Midwest a bit too. We were in Springfield, Missouri, and St. Louis and Chicago. There were reasons for that. My publisher's there, and my family is in parts of that, so we went there too. And we went to Vegas also. But what we did is we partnered with dog rescue groups, and we did it as fundraisers for the organization. So we set a certain price to cover the cost of everything, and then the ticket price was set by the organization. So whatever they set above the cost that we gave them was profit to the organization. And they sold tickets to it, and we helped sell tickets where we could. And then the day of the event, it was a wine tasting, book reading, and the WAGs was the dog. Seamus came with us and did, his own entertaining. So people got to meet the dog in the story, and he paw print. We called it pawtographing the book. We had a paw print done of his stamp. So I signed and read and talked about the book, and Chris poured the wine. And we even found a winery, Cruvin Dogs winery, that all of their labels are just these, it's great wine, and then their labels feature different rescue dogs and things like that, and they donate back to the rescue groups as well. So it's kind of a unique way of marketing the book and the wines as well, and getting people together to help rescues. So it was kind of a, how many wins is that? 3 wins, right? Win, win, win all the way around for everybody. So.
Yeah, awesome. Well, it sounds like you create a lot of fun with your marketing, because you've got dogs, and dogs are cute, dogs are fun, and you have these fun events, like you're throwing these fun events. So yeah, it sounds like it's totally your personality that you're using in your marketing.
A little bit my personality, a little bit of wine, a little bit the dog's personality. Yeah, it worked, and it was a lot of fun to do. So we got to, we went to a lot of neat places, met a lot of great people, and helped a lot of really wonderful rescues doing a lot of good work. In fact, one of those rescues is called Beagle Freedom Project, and they rescue beagles that have been tested on in laboratories. And they brought one of the dogs there. When we did the event, they had a dog there that they had just rescued like a month before, and they had him there to show everyone, and we ended up adopting that dog. So the second dog that I have came from Beagle Freedom Project and came from doing that event. So.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, yeah. And he's one of the stars of the second book that's coming out as well. So a little bit that story is about rescuing him and helping with his rehabilitation, because those dogs, they've been in laboratory their whole life. So he spent the first 18 months as a victim of animal testing. And so he lived in a cage, never saw sunshine, had treats, or, walked on grass or anything like that until Beagle Freedom Project rescued him. And so it's been our process in helping to rehabilitate him. And now he's the cutest, funniest dog, and you'd never know he had that background.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, the interesting thing with memoirs is most authors don't think about writing like a series of memoirs. I mean, normally you write one memoir and you're done. Like, that's your life, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. I know. Yeah, the funny part now is the second one just kind of happened naturally because of adopting these 2 new dogs and the process we went through with them. And so I was able to do that. So I wrote a second memoir, and it's not even out yet. It comes out in October, and people are saying, well, so what are you going to do with the third? And I've been joking and saying, well, I can't keep adopting dogs just to be able to write memoirs, because, well, when I live in a townhome, I'm limited to 2 dogs. So I can't keep doing that. So where I go from here is going to be a big dilemma, but maybe I'll go back to fiction now, right? I don't know. So,
yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and the other interesting thing about your story is that, I mean, most often with memoirs, I mean, the people who become New York Times bestsellers with a memoir, they're like celebrities, movie stars or famous people.
Yeah.
It's very rare for, a kind of an unknown or just unknown author to kind of break out in that field, which is really
You don't even have to put it in quotes. Unknown author. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and that's a lot of what we heard, when I was trying to pitch to an agent, and then when the agent was taking it to publishers, that's kind of what the hurdle to get over is is, yeah, the memoir field has sort of been taken over by celebrities and reality TV people and all that. But there are still good memoirs coming out that are from people with quote unquote normal lives that, you know, pick an interesting portion of their life to talk about. And when we were in the, not so much when I was querying agents, but when my agent was in the submission process to publishers, we went through a time where we would hear from one publisher that, oh, you know, they really liked it, but it's too much of a dog book. And then we would hear from another publisher, well, we really liked it, but cancer books don't sell, or it's too much of a cancer book. And it was like, it was finding the sweet spot of somebody who saw it as more than either one of those two things, and that it made for a unique story. It's also a love story. I mean, there's a big love story in there about my starting to date again, and the man that I started dating at the beginning, and who wasn't a dog person, and I'm still dating him. It's 10 years later, and he wasn't a dog person and had to become a dog person because he was dating me, and then this dog that I love so much got cancer. And then he was still with me and together with me as we went through my cancer, so he learned a lot about it too. So that the love story is in there, the cancer story is in there, the dog story is in there, and I think that Sourcebooks saw it as something more than just, you know, either of those things, either a dog story or a cancer story, and that's finally what got it sold. But before that, we were definitely running into the problem you mentioned, that it was only celebrities, or the field has kind of become well, actually, I think that's true in a lot of publishing these days. Celebrities can get a book published about pretty much anything if somebody already knows them, where we real writers just have to hope and pray and find the right niche, I guess, and that's what happened on the book. So
Yeah.
I stuck
Well,
with
yeah,
it on the second.
such a great lesson to learn, you know, that you have to find the right partners, you know, because just because a publisher offers you a deal doesn't mean it's a good deal if they don't really understand you and your book and who you are and where you're going
Right.
to go with it, you know?
Yeah, and the people at Sourcebooks have been great for me to work with because they're all dog lovers as well. So and I felt really lucky to be paired with Sourcebooks because, you know, I'm getting ready to go to Book Expo America again for my second book in, I think I leave in a little over a week for that. But when I went for the first book, that was the first time I'd ever been to Book Expo America, which if anybody doesn't know what that is, go Google it and look it up. It's the most amazing, I call it Spring Fashion Week for books. It's like a convention center with all the publishers there showing you what their new fall lineup is going to be for their new books coming out. It's more books than you can ever imagine. And it's, for a writer, it's just a dream to be there. Well, when I went the first time, 2 years ago, I guess now it would be, when the first book was being announced as part of the fall lineup, I got there and I walked in and I walked to Sourcebooks' booth inside the convention center, and they had this huge display that up in the air hanging over their booth in the convention center, and there was the cover of my book, probably about 6 feet tall by 4 feet wide, in their sign up there. And it wasn't just, you know, the cover of my book and my first book, it was my dog on the book too. So I not much of a crier, I was darn close to tears when I first saw that, and to be able to see that exhibit and see my book get that kind of a launch from them. And I don't think that would have happened had I been with one of the big publishers or anything like that. I mean, I would have been so overshadowed by so many other books and authors. So I think I got a really unique opportunity by being with Sourcebooks, which is a great publisher, and obviously it worked out well for us.
Mhm. Awesome, awesome. Well, that's great.
Yeah, it was a fun journey. I'm looking forward to going. I'm trying not to expect the same thing for the second book, but secretly I'm hoping that I get something similar for the second book. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you already have a whole bunch of dedicated fans and readers who loved your first book and want to buy the second one too.
Yeah, I hope so. I have a lot of dedicated fans on my Facebook page, and I get a lot of emails and whatnot from folks. And the book has actually sold now, translation rights have sold in 6 different countries. And so it's been a bestseller down in Brazil for probably like 6 months or so. It was on the bestseller list in Brazil, and the second rights in Brazil as well. And now it's come out in, let's see, it came out in Brazil first, and then China, and now it's out in Germany, and Japan, and it'll be coming out in South Korea and the Czech Republic soon. So that's been really fun to see my dog kind of travel around the world. It's cute.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, yeah.
So let's step back a little bit and talk about, you know, how did you find your agent in the first place? Because I know a lot of other authors, they're struggling with, you know, how do I find an agent? I want to get published recently, but, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mentioned to you there was a book before that I co-wrote with a friend that was kind of a gift book thing, and that one we found an agent. We went to the San Francisco Writers Conference and did just the where you can meet and pitch the agents. Wasn't quite a pitch slam, but something similar where you signed up and you had like 5 minutes with the agent, and that's where we found the agent on the first book. Unfortunately, that didn't sell to a publisher, which came as a surprise. You think that getting an agent is such a huge hurdle, but then you're in. But lo and behold, there's another hurdle even after that, which is now the agent has to find a publisher, and we couldn't find a publisher for that book, and that was like, gosh, probably at least 10 years ago now. This time when I did it, first I just started writing the book and then started doing a little research on nonfiction and switching over. I went to another writers conference to learn more about nonfiction because I'd always been writing fiction. And the proposal, the query process is a little bit different for nonfiction. Though nonfiction books are sold on the basis of a proposal rather than the completed manuscript. And at first I was like, great, I don't even have to finish the whole book before I submit the proposal. Then I realized how much work a proposal is, because that's like a business plan for a book. And it's a lot of work, and it's not even anything that ever gets published except maybe the sample chapters, but even those got reworked a lot. So I spent a lot of time on the book proposal and some sample chapters, and I knew going in that my hurdle was going to be people were going to hear that it's a book about a dog and a woman getting cancer, and they were automatically going to think it was going to be a downer or sort of a sad book. So I knew I was going to have to let people know pretty quickly that it was humorous and that it wasn't sad. I was really adamant about the title. The Dog Lived and So Will I was important to me because I'm one of those people who can't read a book if it has a dog in it and I think the dog's going to get hurt or died or even insulted. I don't want to read the book. And so I wanted people to know that even if you're a dog lover, it's okay to read the book, The Dog Lived, right up front in the title. And so I needed to follow through on that in my proposal as well and make sure people knew that. So I did spend a lot of time on the proposal, spent a lot of time on the query letter, again making sure that it would be obvious that the book was going to be more lighthearted than you might expect. And then I used querytracker.net, which I had found out about at one of the conferences I was at. And for me it works great because I'm not that adept with technical stuff, and it's a really easy site to figure out like who the agents are and what they represent. You can search, narrow down your search. So I looked for, who represents memoirs, who represents animal books, health or cancer books and whatnot, and work from there. You can submit your query letter. I have nothing to do with the site, even though it may sound like an ad for them. This is just how I did it. You can submit your query letter right there through the site as well. So that's what I did. And like I said, early on, I got a good response. I got like far more than half, probably close to like 2/3 of the agents I queried actually asked for the proposal. So I kind of knew I was on to something, and I slowed up my submitting to go ahead and wait because I realized, okay, it must be good. People are responding, so I don't need to have it out there to too many people at one time. And I had I think I had about like 10 proposals out maybe, and that's when I thought, oh, that's enough, I should wait and see what happens. And I ended up getting an offer of representation pretty quickly from one of them, and then I followed up with the others and said, okay, I have an offer. Can I hear from you by the end of the week? And I heard from 2 others, one with an offer and one with saying, I think I'm going to make an offer, but I'm in the process of switching agencies. And he was leaving a big agency and going out on his own, which really kind of changed things for me a bit. And he was kind enough to say, if that makes a difference to you, I realize you might have been submitting to me based on the agency I was with. If that makes a difference to you, I understand. And I didn't really know enough to know if that should make a difference to me or not. I just really, really felt strongly about the one agent who made an offer that I ended up going with, which is Sarah Jane Fryman out of New York, and Sarah Jane Fryman Literary Agency. And much like I feel I was with the right publisher with Sourcebooks, I feel strongly that I ended up with the right agent because I felt like my strengths weren't necessarily her strengths, but definitely my weaknesses were her strengths in the writing process. And she is an old school agent who I'm told this is really uncommon. So again, I felt very lucky. She worked with me on the proposal and on the sample chapters, and she really edited and revised things and told me how to redo things and gave me suggestions before she took it out to the publisher. She just didn't take it and say, okay, I'm representing you, let's go. She really reworked things and gave me great advice. And I'll never forget her biggest piece of advice, which turned out to be absolutely 100% correct, was she said to me, if you can make them laugh, you might have you can sell this. If you can make them cry, you can sell this. If you can make them laugh and cry, you might have a bestseller. You need to make me cry. And I was like, oh, no, I don't. No, I don't. I don't need to make you cry. That's not what this book is about. No, it's funny. It's light. And she said, no, it's a book about you and your dog going through cancer. There have to be some soft, sentimental moments. And of course there were in the real process. So I realized when she said that I had gone overboard in making sure that people didn't cry or didn't feel bad in this book, because I was so worried about everybody understanding that it was funnier and lighter, and that it's ultimately a story about hope and love, not sadness and cancer. So she made me rework it until I made her cry in the sample chapters. And when I finally made her cry in the sample chapters, she said, okay, we're ready to submit now. And I think that experience really taught me I was with the right agent, because I would not have done that myself. And she really made it a much stronger book for making me do that.
That's awesome. That's such a great story, and it just goes to show like the importance of finding the right mentor who really, like you said, who has their strengths or your weaknesses, so they can compensate for things that you're not good enough at, or that you just don't see, like you just didn't know.
Right. I shied away from it because I was worried about the response, and then she kind of gave me the freedom to not shy away from it. That no, this is what makes a well-rounded, good book. She also really pulled the love story out of the book and said, that's something that's going to be universal. People want to root for the underdog. Part of the love story in the book, as I mentioned, was the dating, but he's 12 years younger than me. So that was a big deal and a big sort of crisis thing for me in going through this. And she was like, no, people are going to relate to that. They're going to relate to it's not the perfect romance, and it's not what everybody envisions, and yet it turned into the perfect love story. So share that. It's a universal experience. So she was just amazing at helping shape the story, and I felt like I got like a master's degree in writing by going through the whole publishing process and rewriting process with her. And she was there and available for me when even after we sold it. I was going through the editing process with my actual editor, who is also, I just feel really lucky to have had her too, and I have the same editor for the second book, so I'm feeling very lucky and feeling like I should knock on all kinds of wood while I'm saying these things to you.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, one great lesson I'm getting from you, and I really want to share with people listening right now, is how much you went out to writers' conferences, and to the Book Expo and all these different writers' conferences, and you put yourself out there. And then not only that, but then you took action. So when you heard about querytracker.net, you actually went there and started using it.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of action and momentum and proactivity that creates the success, because every opportunity you saw along the way, you took it, and that's what eventually led you to where you are now.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like I mentioned earlier, I'm a lawyer by day. Just not this week. I'm home writing and I do a lot of speaking now too on the book and other topics, but. So at any rate, I'm a lawyer, and that's what I knew, and that's what I did. So when I got to the stage in writing where I wanted it to be what I do in a business, because it is a business, I figured, well, I better go learn about that from people who know about it. So I went to, at the time, the first conference I went to a writers retreat and a conference, and that was the Maui Writers Retreat and Conference. I laugh when I say that because it just sounds like heaven, and it was. I mean, you're in Maui, and it's a writers retreat and then a conference part of it. So that kind of got me very interested in continuing to go to conferences, because I got to be around other writers, published and not, and struggling, and beginners and more advanced and whatnot. I got to be around writers, which is a whole different breed of people than lawyers, and it was wonderful. It was like finding my people. And learning more about the process that way. I have some very good friends who I go on pretty close to an annual writing retreat with, who I met at the Maui Writers Retreat. Now, 10 years later, we still get together to write, and we still find ourselves going to beach locations to have those writers retreats. But hey, whatever inspires, right? But yeah, I loved the conferences. I wish I had more time to go now. Um, but I'm still now I have like three full-time jobs, so I haven't been to a conference in a while, but I would love to go again. It's worth it. You have to learn the business side of it, and that's a great way of doing it. Plus, you meet agents, you understand what that process is about. Going to Book Expo, that was something my publisher sent me to, because that's a trade-only show. It's not really a place to meet agents or anything. But what I learned there was a lot about the publishing world, and I kind of could see it from agents and editors' point of view. When you go to this conference and you see, I mean, thousands and thousands of books being released in the fall, you realize, and those are the ones that made it, right? That somebody picked up and a publisher is going to publish. You realize just how stiff the competition is out there, and just how much an agent would have to weed through to decide, okay, this is the one I'm going to stake my reputation, or one of the ones I'm going to stake my reputation on and try to make, work and get to a publisher. And you realize the same thing about the publisher. And I was a lot more I think, respectful of the process, and I had a lot more gratitude. I was pretty thankful anyway that they picked me up, but then I really understood how lucky I was, and how I had a responsibility, not just to me, but to my agent, to my publisher, to really try my best too to make this book work. I could see how much everybody had invested in me, and that it wasn't, my job wasn't done when the book was done and turned in, that there was still a lot to be done to promote it. Luckily, I love doing that too, but I think that going out there and seeing that really brought that home for me as well. So, yeah,
Awesome.
important.
It's a powerful lesson for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if you could leave us with just one more tip for authors, one more, lesson that you'd love every author to learn, what would it be?
Well, I kind of default to the typical one, right? Keep writing, because that's what we all need to do. I have to remind myself of that all the time too. But I think I'll go maybe a little bit more in point with what we've been talking about, which is it's important to find the right people, to just surround yourself with the right people. Whether that, in the writing process, that's other writers and people who are going to buoy you up and help you get through your process. When you're moving on to this searching for an agent process, then yeah, get out there and find out how it's done. If that's the route you're going to go, find out how it's done, who it's best to work with. Query Tracker happened to be the way I did it, and I loved it. I'm sure there are other sites out there as well. And yeah, and I remember being on Query Tracker as well, that everybody was supporting each other, because you start to see there's a lot of conversation and back and forth about who submitted to what agents and how they're doing, and you get that support. You're not alone. And choosing an agent, I was lucky enough to have a choice, and I chose the one that I thought would work best for me, and I was right. I didn't, and it wasn't the first one who made an offer. So to sum all of that up, very long answers to your questions, huh? Sorry. I would just say, yeah, stick to it and just surround yourself with the right people.
Well, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. I really appreciate it. And before you go, tell us where people can find out more information about you and your books.
Oh, yeah, great, thank you. And I'm, knock on wood, I'm going to say I think we made it through without either of my beagles howling through it, although that might have been funny. My website is teresarhyne.com. It's TERESARHYN as in Nancy E.com. I'm on Facebook, but it's The Dog Lived. I've got to switch that over to an author page, but right now it's a book page. So on Facebook, you can find us at The Dog Lived, or on Twitter, I'm at Teresa Rhyne. And yeah, that's where I am. And I post on where I'm appearing and what I'm doing as often as I can, and lots of cute doggy photos, which are very important.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being with us today, Teresa. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.